All right, I think we will go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for joining today's webinar. Today, we are going to talk about how to put Family Farm Action Alliance's Anti-Monopoly Toolkit for Congress to work for you and your organizations. My name is Anna, and I'm the Communications Coordinator at Family Farm Action Alliance. For those who aren't familiar, Family Farm Action Alliance is a research, policy development, and network builder for farmers, ranchers, food chain workers, consumers, organizations, and policymakers up and down the food supply chain. We are working to build a sustainable, inclusive economy in which everyone has the right to share in the prosperity that they helped build, and that respects our land, natural resources, and neighbors around the world. We're excited about the release of our comprehensive toolkit for the 117th Congress to tackle the dangerous levels of consolidation in today's food system. As a service-based organization, we're even more excited that you've joined us today to learn how to put this toolkit to work for you in your states and communities. So a quick overview of today's webinar. Emily Miller, Family Farm Action Alliance's Policy and Research Manager, will walk us through how the toolkit came to be, specific points of intervention outlined in the toolkit, and explore how each of the 3 toolkit components can be used. And then we're going to turn things over to Jake Davis, Family Farm Action Senior Policy Advisor, to give his view of key pieces of legislation that are outlined in the toolkit, the pulse on the ground and appetite in Washington, D.C. towards our recommendations, and how you can get plugged into exclusive action by joining the Farm Action Team's new membership program. Also on this webinar, we have Joa Maxwell, Angela Huffman, and Cody Atkinson from our team. Finally, we'll be sure to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So if you have any questions at any time, please drop them in the Q&A tab, not the chat box. So with that, I will pass it to you, Emily.
Thanks so much, Anna, and thank you all for being here. This is so exciting that you have joined us this morning. So I'm quickly going to be walking through some previous research we did in a report titled The Food System Concentration and Its Impacts that was released earlier in 2020. And what that found was, no surprise, that the agri-food system today is concentrated and consolidated from local to global levels. The research from that report points out that a large factor in this rising consolidation has been the government's inaction, and that they've failed to do their job in reining in this consolidation. And that's turned into a handful of multinational corporations and their CEOs shaping our food system that ultimately drives independent farmers and ranchers off the land. It abuses workers, it degrades our environment, and it leaves consumers without healthy and safe food choices. To reiterate, and why this is relevant, is that concentration and consolidation levels have gotten so high that the decision-making power is in the hands of just a few of those multinational CEOs to determine who farms, what they farm, how they farm it, and ultimately who gets to eat. So a grim picture, but the good news is our 2020 report also recommended 6 key points of intervention to democratize our agri-food system. From there, Family Farm Action Alliance crafted the comprehensive anti-monopoly toolkit that brought you all here today. So we're going to go through that a little later. A big challenge, though, is that we can't do this alone, and there's a lot of pieces in this toolkit, and it's kind of a big lift. So we're glad you're here, and we need the folks on this webinar in your organizations, your communities and states to be putting these points of intervention to work to actually democratize the agri-food system. So we hope that you'll be able to take these policy recommendations today, put them into use for immediate actions, and then also to pave the way for a transformative 2023 Farm Bill with us working all together. So I'm quickly going to go over the top findings from our 2020 report, the food system concentration and its impacts. I'll go over the 6 points of intervention, and then I'll also break down the components that are in the toolkit. So quickly, I'm going to screen share. get us all on the same page. Here we go. So what you see here are called CR4 graphs. If you're not familiar with these, a CR4 is the concentration ratio of the top 4 firms in a sector. And so you'll see on these firms, or in these graphs, these are the inputs that farmers typically need in our conventional systems to produce food. In each of these sectors, you can see the top 4 firms that control the markets and the percentage of the markets those collectively control. We're typically concerned when a CR4 is over 40%. That signals things like price fixing and abuses are likely. So you see in these inputs, not only are they all highly consolidated, it's the same 4 firms across sectors for the inputs that farmers need. On the market side, you can see the same for soybean processing, beef processing, pork and chicken. These are all highly consolidated. It's the same 4 firms. And then the bottom 4 rows, you can see that's the retail side. That's what consumers are seeing in the grocery stores. So not only are the farmers squeezed at the input and output side, consumers are also harmed because of this high consolidation. More broadly, on farm, this looks like we can see in these graphs. You have the blue bar, that's the total farms. And then that orange line is the sales or inventory midpoint. Now, what that means is that half of the sales are above that line and half of the sales are below. So we can see over time from 1987 to 2017, the number of total farms has gone down drastically, while the sales and inventory midpoints have skyrocketed. So it's fewer farms, more consolidated farms producing more. But why would we want our food system organized this way? Well, it's been under the myth and guise of efficiency and feeding more people, and this is required and this is inevitable. However, we know that that's not the case. This highly consolidated, weak and brittle agri-food system isn't feeding people. We know that these things existed before the COVID pandemic. Our agri-food system was already weak, but we saw an increase of dumped milk, smashed eggs, euthanization of millions of animals, including chickens and hogs, egregious working conditions in meatpacking. We've also seen disproportionately in rural areas have been harmed. They were already hurting after the 2008 economic recession. They'd been left behind since. And so these harms are disproportionately impacting rural areas as far as food insecurity and poverty as well. So from this, here are the 6 points of intervention that we found from the report. I'd encourage you to take a closer look if you haven't yet, but I'll read these because they're important, so I apologize for the text as well, but here they are. So what would democratizing the agri-food system look like? 1, curb monopolistic tendencies in the agri-food system. 2, shine a racial lens on scholarship on agri-food system power and consolidation. 3, prioritize resilience and redundancy. 4, to rethink core assumptions such as efficiency and property rights. 5, encourage the development of alternative production and consumption arrangements. And 6, to rethink what kinds of crops, livestock, and even sectors of the food system are subsidized in a way that allows citizens to truly weigh their benefits and consequences. So to reiterate, these are the 6 key points of intervention to democratize the food system. That means to take the power that's in the hands of those few CEOs and spread it to the people so everyone can make decisions about the agri-food system and how it works for them. So to take a quick look at how Family Farm Action Alliance put this to work, this is a table of the legislative packages that were previously filed in the 116th Congress. And you'll see that above the top is highlighted which point of intervention that it addresses. So this was a way for us to see, okay, this is the legislation we put out before. What specific points of intervention are we targeting? What specific ways are we trying to improve and democratize the agri-food system? This is publicly available. It's in our toolkit, and we'll be using a same form for keeping track of our 117th Congress legislation packages on the Family Farm Action side. The comprehensive toolkit includes a longer report, which you're seeing on your left. It's titled Ushering in a Better Future for Food and Agriculture, Policy Recommendations to the 117th Congress, for a deep dive into our specific recommendations. And then we also have a series of one-pagers, supplemental one-pagers, one for each of the 6 points of intervention. And we'll take a closer look at these. So right now you're looking at the cover of the policy recommendations. If you haven't cracked it open yet, here is your chance. Lucky day. So here's the table of contents. You can see we've included a background. So this background is really a primer and consolidation. It distills the key points from that 2020 report, the food system I was talking about. So it's really a valuable primer to get us all on the same page to look deeper into these policy recommendations. You'll also see we have deep dive into all 6 key points of intervention outlined. Really quick, here's what the first one looks like: curbing globalized concentration. You can see that we have a paragraph up top that kind of puts us all in the same context. It's a quick blurb over what that key point of intervention really means. And then you'll see we go into a deeper dive of specific policy recommendations. And we do that for each of the 6 key points. Here's an up close of one of the one-pagers. This is the supplemental toolkit. And what this does is it breaks down what you can do into 3 specific action steps. So first of all, we have what key point it addresses in that same blurb that gets us all on the same page, kind of a primer. But then the first action is that we can urge folks to support existing legislation. Urge your Congress member to co-sponsor, to introduce in both the House and Senate. The second one is to urge administrative action on the things that Congress doesn't have authority to do, but we can still encourage members to write letters to administrations, send around to your colleagues, that sort of thing. And then third, folks can champion new legislation and action if they want to go a step further. This section includes creating programs that haven't been created yet, drafting new legislative ideas. So it gives the option to become a champion in each of these 6 areas. And so now that you have a little bit deeper look into the toolkit, we hope that you feel empowered to use the toolkit in your own communities, your own organizations, and your states. You can use these one-pagers simply as are. Call your own representatives, organize phone banks, organize letter writing sessions, go crazy. However, it can best suit you and your organization. You can use them to organize action alerts. Jake later is going to talk a little bit more about what we can expect. So, feel free to use these asks and these recommendations in tandem with what Jake is working on the Family Farm Action side. And then also, and lastly, I'd encourage you to use these 6 key points of intervention in your own organizing. Perhaps your farmers are making business plans and they want to integrate some of these democratizing principles, or you're writing a grant or you're working on grant deliverables. We really encourage you to take these 6 key points of intervention, work with us and your members to make it a comprehensive toolkit to use for you. So that's it for me. Looking forward to clearing up any questions and continuing this discussion. But with that, I will pass it to Jake.
Thanks, Emily, and that's a great synopsis. We appreciate that, and thanks for all your hard work on putting that together, and the entire team's work on putting that together. Some of you certainly may be asking, why are we going to such extensive efforts in the beginning of this Congress to make this full and robust set of recommendations to Congress? The truth of the matter is that in Washington, D.C., we've seen obviously a significant shift moving in from the 116th to the 117th Congress. Not only obviously do we have a new administration to talk with and inform and educate about these issues, but we have a significant sea change in a variety of ways in the overall, Congress makeup, including new House Agriculture Committee chairman, and the opportunity to sort of begin dialogue on that front, as well as the long, response to an economic crisis that has been created by a global pandemic. So there's a whole range of reasons to begin work on these issues. And I think that ultimately we're optimistic that many of the things that are included in these recommendations are already starting to be heard and gathering some levels of traction among policymakers, both in the federal, state, and state levels, including things in the last COVID relief bill, like significant funding for small scale meat processing plants, about $60 million there, and an additional emergency $100 million in the local agriculture marketing program, which we've been advocating for since the beginning of the pandemic for mid-tier local and regional food chain companies and farmers and farmer cooperatives. So we're starting to see some traction on those fronts. And we also spent a huge amount of time over the 116th Congress, the last 2 years, thinking about and working on policies that bundle up these 6 key concepts that Emily was just talking about. Some of those bills that I'll just briefly highlight that work on those sorts of things include early work on things like the agribusiness merger moratorium bill, but round out with a huge amount of work on the Farm System Reform Act, which includes things like packers and stockyards revisions that need to be implemented and need to give the administration new regulatory enforcement tools. We also have spent a huge amount of our time working with allies and communities of color on legislation like the Justice for Black Farmers Act, which was released at the end of the 116th Congress by Senator Booker, and the fact that we recognize that the discrimination and challenges that face communities of color, the indigenous communities, we just simply couldn't move forward on democratizing the food system without including that full range of folks in the process. So, those are a couple of highlights. There's a whole bunch of bills in the packet that we've been talking about that, are things that we'll continue to push for. I do want to set the frame just a little bit in the fact that in the early part of the 117th Congress, we're already hearing that, a big chunk of the work that we're going to be seeing by Congress is dealing with the aftermath or current state of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the fact of the matter is there's a huge number of food system issues built right into that, right? We saw the fragileness of our food system when store shelves were empty. But we also saw the mistreatment of our food chain workers as folks in meat processing plants got sick and died in poor working conditions. So we know that there's a huge number of challenges that need to be taken on. And these challenges didn't just emerge because of COVID-19, right? Those challenges were there and existed. It's just that the pandemic has shined a new and brighter light on those issues for lots and lots of folks. And so we think that there's a real opportunity to make headway on those. We also know that the interest of the President Biden's administration and Congress is to deal with economic prosperity and thinking about how we deal with an economic recovery. So there's going to be a lot of budgetary considerations and appropriations considerations that will become very top of mind. And one of those high priorities on a lot of folks' minds has even been focusing on, the climate crisis and figuring out how to, mitigate these extreme weather challenges and find new opportunities for jobs. So there's a whole range of issues that are embedded in the work that we're doing around the agri-food system that will be top of mind. And I think that the key for all of us as we're thinking about that is to ensure that this hyper consolidation that Emily was just talking about doesn't get worse because of the policies that we that we implement, but rather that by solving these other challenges, we're also making the food system less consolidated, less fragile, more diverse in nature, leveling the playing field, and certainly including communities that have been historically disadvantaged. So I think that is the landscape that we're seeing in Washington, D.C. right now. We're already actively in conversations and moving this agenda with folks in Washington, D.C. But we, as Emily said, need all of your help and recognize that there's going to be opportunities to work together and that there's going to be opportunities for us to work in parallel with each other. That being said, Family Farm Action and Family Farm Action Alliance has recently launched our new membership program, which allows for folks to sort of get insider access for no better term to the Family Farm Action and Family Farm Action Alliance staff as we try to move these agendas. We're going to be holding monthly video calls to try to answer questions and engage people. We're going to be sharing with you, those of you who are members, opportunities to get involved from, to talking to your congressman, whether that be in state or potentially if we can all travel again at some point in Washington, D.C., and a whole range of things that will be great opportunities. We have a new Facebook community and Facebook group that we're trying to gather diverse voices and help people who may feel like they're working on these issues out there on their own in their own communities to create this opportunity to collaborate and think about good ideas from other parts of the country. And to be quite honest, to just know that we're not out there alone fighting this fight, because there are so many of us that are putting a lot of energy into this. So you can join both organizations. One membership gets you a membership to both organizations. We both have individual memberships at $35 and organizational at $100. So feel free to take advantage of that opportunity as well and become a member as soon as possible so that we can keep you in the loop with what's happening. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Anna to work on to administer our Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Jake and Emily, for those informative presentations. We are now going to open up the Q&A. So if you haven't had a chance to submit a question to the Q&A and you would like to, please do so now. And we will do our best to answer all of the questions in the order that they are asked. So our first question is an easy one that I can answer, which is, can I share this recording with my team when it's over? And the answer is yes, we are recording this and we will be sending it out after the conclusion of the webinar. So you can look forward to that. Next question from Sherry Duggar. I'd like to get some of our community members talking to some of the legislators that you're in contact with to push this agenda, if possible, or partner on timed action alerts that we can share and encourage with our communities.
Great, I'll take that one if you want, Emily. Sherry, thanks for the question. I think that's a great idea. I think that one of the things that we need to be focused on is finding opportunities to move and having a sort of direct legislator conversation, because certainly people like myself and Joe and others can have these conversations in Washington, D.C. with staffers on the Hill and members of Congress. But one of the most powerful opportunities is to have farmers, ranchers, rural community members, food system workers, people who eat, quite honestly, which is everyone, to start talking to legislators about these issues. And part of the I think the hope for the toolkit is that it'll start getting that conversation going. We can also certainly collaborate on, Sherry, with your folks to think about who the most important targets are. And we're going to be putting target lists together as things like reconciliation bills. That's a budget bill inside kind of baseball term that will focus on these issues. As we get towards that process, I think it would be really a great idea for us to think about key targets in Washington, D.C. I'll just mention that obviously the Ag Committee targets are really important. So people like Stabenow and Bozeman on the Senate side. We've got, as I mentioned, Representative Scott, who's a new chair of the House Agriculture Committee. So anybody from Georgia that we might know of. But then I think that even other committees like the budget committees and appropriations committees. So Senator Sanders, Representative DeLauro, those are places we can start, but certainly, Sherry, let's talk more about ways that we can collaborate on who we get folks talking to.
Yeah, with that, I would also add that if you are like in the toolkit and trying to use it and have suggestions for, how it could be improved or how, what information would be better for you to best serve your members, we're all ears. So just let us know. I'm happy to work with you.
Definitely. Thank you, Jake and Emily. Our next question. What efforts are you making to address financing that is available for farmers? I understand that the farm credit system favors large industrial operations and not family farmers.
Yeah, great question. Diving into the policy recommendations, we do have recommendations where we address access to finance, access to loans, the terms of those loans. So first and foremost, when it comes to rethinking finance, we want to make sure that all farmers have the same ability to access those loans. So in our anti-racist food and farm policy recommendations, we have BIPOC-centered recommendations that addresses access. But then under some other policy recommendations, we have extending operating loan terms from 7 to 20 years, bundling different types of loans, such as like marketing assistant loans could be like wrapped into the operating loan term, just things that make farm credit and farm finance a little more applicable and pragmatic, and allow farmers to implement these long-term solutions, especially regenerative farmers where it takes longer than 7 years to see a turnaround. And so many farmers are caught in this financial treadmill, the short-term, short look, whether or not they want to be there. So that's definitely a priority of ours. And I'd be interested, Jake or Joe, if you have any thing to add.
Well, I'll just add a couple, which you hit on some great ones. A couple that come right to mind is in the Justice for Black Farmers Act, which is listed in the priorities, there's a new opportunity for setting up basically banking institutions, sort of, I won't say the equivalent to farm credit system, but a new credit system that would be specifically oriented around cooperative ownership of financial institutions that would be minority owned and be socially disadvantaged owned. So obviously starting with things like, Black owned financial institutions in the Southeast, but that also could extend to opportunities for folks to get credit, Native American communities in the West or the Southwest to be setting up their own credit institutions. Because look, we just simply know that there's a discrimination, not only within USDA and USDA's financial institutions, but we also know that there's discrimination in the way that folks like Farm Credit Service, administers loans and who has access to them. And we also know that there's consolidation, right? Consolidation in the financial institution. So that's one. But then the other thing we recognize, and Emily would probably speak better about the feed meat complex and the sort of commodity subsidy system that we have. But what we also know is that we need more than just loans, right? Like we're going to need some federal support to help farmers and ranchers get out of this sort of predatory cycle. So in the Farm System Reform Act, for example, we advocated hard for a significant pool of money that would just help people move from the factory farm model into a model that is more sustainable, more practical, more regenerative, and would actually, quite honestly, be more popular or more profitable for farmers and ranchers. But they're stuck in these huge debt burdens that they got into as they were sort of deceived getting into these broader contracts. So the opportunity to get some funds that help them get outside of that structure would be really important. So there's $100 billion built into the Farm System Reform Act for that sort of thing. So not only do we believe that we need to reform credit, but we also need to put money into getting farmers and ranchers into a food system we believe matches our value system.
Definitely. Thank you. Our next question, let us know which of the actions that you see the biggest opportunity for non-farmer consumers to support.
That's a great question. I think we're all eaters, whether or not we're farmers, we're all consumers. And, as the research told us, just anecdotally, we know that this consolidated agro-food system harms us all because we're all on the consumer side. We're all eating the food. So which of the actions, I think it just falls in line with the actions that our farmer members are taking as well. The biggest priority for us is first and foremost, the anti-racist food and farm policy, getting the Justice for Black Farmers Act, because we all have to be on the same starting point, farmer, consumer or not. So that would be my piece, is just because you yourself aren't farming or aren't on land, still farmers need allies and consumers need farmers. So plug in wherever you can and wherever you'd like to, and we're here to help.
And I'll just add briefly to that to say, we need eaters, we need consumers. Farmers are not going to do this alone. We're not going to change the system alone. It's just too big of a problem. And so we're going to need folks pushing from a consumer level, from an eater level, to get, let's say, legislators who maybe don't always see themselves in farm policy, urban legislators, folks who are sort of what we would call unconventional allies, moving in the right direction on this. So if you've got an organization or an affiliation of folks that can see themselves agreeing with these values, we want to work with them. We're not really concerned that we're only working with farm groups. We want to broaden the horizon of people that are pushing for this agenda, because we just know that it's built into our values that we all need a more resilient food system, and we need to have more access for people to get into farming, and we need a new generation of farmers. But we also, recognize that COVID-19 pointed out to us very clearly that we also need a food system that keeps us fed as well.
Definitely. Great. So this next question, I think, would go to Joe from Carolyn Yee. Do you have any tribal members? If so, would you forward that contact's information to me so that I can send to my tribal contacts statewide in California?
First, we just kicked off our membership organization, and we're just beginning to build that list. Be happy to always share that. We pride ourselves in transparency and want to make sure everybody knows who is supporting us. I think that does make a difference. We're proud of the support that we have. We have worked directly with various organizations that represent indigenous farmers and the tribes. We would be happy to provide that. You can go to info, our info email account, info@Farm Action Alliance and .org, and put that question in, and Cody or I or Angela will forward you the various organizations that have participated that represent indigenous farmers or tribes. that have participated in building out the policy recommendations that we have presented. As a specific note, most of the organizations that we've worked with representing the tribes highlight, and this question was already asked, but I want to put a little asterisk by it. Access to capital is one of the biggest hurdles that we're told that many of these tribes are having and the indigenous farmers are having. And so time and time again, that was their input, and it's one reason we've woven that in throughout that document. But we would provide that to you if we would have your email. Anybody else that's interested, we would be happy to provide you a list of the organizations that have helped. We don't do this alone. We do this together. We don't, Angela on here handles all of our communications and our thought and strategic planning on programs. And one of the things these toolkits are, if you have an organization and you like what you see, we always like to be there to support you. But if you want to take it and put your brand on it and own it, you have our rights. It's not copywritten. We don't believe in that. This is a joint thought by many organizations that aren't on this call. And so take it and own it and move it. And if we can help you, that's what we want to do. Email us again at our info account, and we'd be happy to forward you the various organizations that helped us put through these recommendations to the Congress. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Joe. All right, moving on to our next question. There is a movement to press for funding for local businesses that have been particularly hurt by the pandemic. I believe that this is an opportunity to search for funding small businesses in rural and urban America. Are you making efforts in this regard?
So the short answer is yes. That as I mentioned, our work around the local agriculture marketing program, LAMP program, in the last COVID relief bill is sort of an example of that, where a lot of the sort of what we call mid-tier businesses, so those local food distribution businesses, not the farmer who was helped by USDA and not necessarily the consumer who was helped by a variety of programs, folks who were experiencing food insecurity is focused on things like the EBT or SNAP benefit program, which is the old food stamp program, or the new Farm to Families food box program, sort of helped on that end of the system. A lot of small family businesses, we're talking about restaurants or food processing facilities or folks who aggregate and distribute local food. Those folks found themselves in a really tough position, particularly a lot of those restaurants that have been great, like farm to table allies historically. And so that program that I talked about, the additional $100 million there, is just one tiny example. It's not nearly enough. We definitely think that there's an opportunity to do more in that category, right? And as long as we're focused on this idea of making sure that not those consolidated multinational corporations get the funding, but that the small and local businesses, whether they be rural or urban, in that food system structure, gets the funding, and that's something we'll continue to work on. I think there's real opportunity, and I think there's real recognition that some businesses, and we know. The folks who work on small business will know better than I, but hearing numbers like 1 in 5 small businesses closing, we know that that's going to be a high priority. But we also know that things like the Paycheck Protection Program that was rolled out was just very complicated for some of these businesses to access the ways that they were able to get it. And we were just to tie this back to capital that Joe mentioned and we were talking about earlier. A lot of people had to get those Paycheck Protection Programs through their community banks and through the banks that they worked with. Unfortunately, so many of our community banks have been consolidated into giant multinational banks, and those folks were giving priority to much bigger businesses and doing bigger loans. And it was just very, very difficult for folks that were in rural communities or even urban communities of color to get access to those programs. And so we know that the access gap is critical. I mean, certainly the way we get those funds appropriated first, but the second is, how do we get people into them efficiently and make that work for them? So that's a long way of saying yes, but there are certainly a lot of criteria, and we'll rely on our allies in the small business world as well to help guide those things and give us encouragement about, where those fit. But when it certainly comes to food system issues, something we're already aware of and know is going to be a part of the conversation in the next, 3 or 4 months.
Definitely. Great question. And another great question from Sherry. Jake just mentioned that getting farmers and ranchers into a food system that matches our value system. I keep thinking about how we can engage in advocacy and change efforts more upstream. Any ideas on how to get in front of these would-be farmers or contract growers before they sign on dotted lines with corporations or banks?
Jake was called out, so I'll give him a chance to.
Thanks, Emily.
But I think, the policy recommendations are a coupling of immediate actions, what we can do now, and looking for long term. This has been decades of inaction from Congress, so it's going to take a little time to be able to get in front. But the ultimate goal of these 6 points is to democratize the agri-food system and to transform it into something wherein it would just be the system that is, non-predatorial financing and non-predatory growing systems. That just wouldn't be the norm anymore. So that's my broad term sunshine and roses answer, and I'll let Jake make us cry a little bit.
Right. I mean, and Sherry, as much as anyone that is the sort of $1 million question. And to Emily's point, that certainly these are predatory systems, right? And we have regulatory environments and sometimes they're better than others for things like predatory lending. But we don't have a lot currently in the way of these, contract growers. What we do know, though, is that if we strengthen where we started, right, we have the antitrust bones for food and agriculture in the Packers and Stockyards Act. And what we need to be doing is thinking about how to make that Packers and Stockyards Act work for the 21st century. And one of the quickest answers to that is to get rid of this idea that you have to be able to convince a judge that the action that a company took will harm the entire industry rather than just yourself. Because one of the ways we can hold people accountable and one of the ways we can make these contracts less predatory is to make sure that when they are predatory, we're holding these people, these multinational corporations accountable through litigation strategies. So one of the reasons that we need to make sure that individual harm component of the Packers and Stockyards is something that we can actually enforce, and that many of you will know, if you've been following this, we've been fighting for these things called the Farmers Fair Practice Rules for a long time, and it's been very contentious. The reason the industry fights us so hard on those fair practice rules is that when people can actually see, when the courts can force people to be honest about what these contracts are, very, very few people are going to want to sign these contracts, because look, we know that 70% of poultry growers live at or below the poverty level. So enforcing that the idea that we need to have fair practices within our contracting system, and we need these companies to quit being predatory and be honest, that's a first big step to helping us. But I also recognize, Sherry, and I think it's right, that we also need an organizing strategy behind that to just be getting into these conversations before one of these meat processing plants moves in and just starts selling people on the greatness of how much money they're going to make, which we all know is just dishonest and not true.
Yeah, and just to kind of backpack on what Jake was saying, organizing is really the key in the proactive strategy that Sherry, your organization, and many of the organizations that from the folks that I recognize are attending, they already are engaged in. And what we want this toolkit to be, and our other materials to be, is something to get in front of your community, as well as your elected officials, or even those running for office, and then making sure that they are able to speak out, confidently and competently, and have that backup from organizations like ours, or any local organizations that you all are a part of, and make it a key issue in those campaigns. Something that it makes it harder and harder to ignore, and we can confront these issues up front, and hopefully get into the ears of these beginning farmers, or even those kind of on the verge of potentially going to sign with these contract organizations. So just a lot of grassroots organizing and getting these in front of elected officials or candidates.
And I'll just add too, when Nebraska, when Costco moved into Nebraska a couple years back, we did some organizing around that, trying to get in front of farmers before they signed on with Costco. And we'd be happy to, talk with you about that. But we focused on reaching out to local farm groups, advertising in ag trade papers in the state, targeted social media ads, and we went out and held some local community meetings there in Nebraska.
Awesome.
Well, just one more point to that, Anna. Sorry,
Go ahead.
An important question that Sherry asked. The other thing we have to do is ensure that there's an alternative, right? Like the biggest thing we need to do, not the biggest thing, so many things we need to do, but we need to make sure that there's an alternative for farmers and ranchers to feel like they can keep the family farm and make a living on the farm without having to sign these contracts, right? And so that's also incredibly important, because it's just so challenging. And that's why a lot, we try to divide our work in the positive and negative, right? And to fight the things we don't like, but let's actually create the food system we do like, and that does agree with our values, so that there are real alternatives. And unfortunately, there's a lot of work to do in creating those alternatives still.
Definitely an important point. All right. Our next question is thoughts on the Growing Climate Solutions Act and carbon markets in general, for anyone.
Real quick before I pass it to Jake, which seems to be the theme of this Q&A. In our policy recommendations, this is included in a needs a legislative champion. In the policy recommendations, we tie climate solutions, carbon programs to antitrust. So we are concerned, we don't want a solution to be put out there by a corporation or firm that is already a net polluter, as described by the EPA, or has a 25% control of their respective market or markets. So that's in the toolkit. And then we also do highlight the Agriculture Resilience Act in the toolkit, but I'll pass it to Jake for specifics.
Yeah. So this has been a hot topic, right? The idea of the carbon markets and carbon banks and a whole range of things. And to Emily's point, our real fear is that that will simply be a way for those who have already extracted and exploited the most out of family farmers and ranchers to find another way to extract more, whether that be through the form of greenwashing or whether it be through legitimate carbon reductions. Yet to be seen what actually will happen. But the truth of the matter is we prioritize and prefer, and this is about democratization of the agri-food system, right? And getting more people of color into the process. We prefer traditional conservation programs that have field staff and have folks on the ground who know how to administer those programs because I'm going to be just completely frank. I don't see the opportunity that, somebody like Bear Monsanto is going to be going to, black farmers in the Southeast who have on average 49 acres, asking them to sign up for their programs, right? What we're going to see is more and more discrimination. We're going to see more and more consolidation of wealth. That's a major mistake in in a place where we have significant opportunity. What we can do, though, is invest in things like the Climate Stewardship Program and other conservation programs, a conservation reserve program. We can think about ways to put more renewable energy in rural America. All those sorts of things can be done through programs that sort of exist already. And so that's part of why we mentioned the Climate Resilience Act, and the Climate Stewardship Act is one that came at the very beginning of the 116th Congress, that focuses on those things rather than sort of this new bright and shiny thing that is being promoted by quite honestly by those folks who are doing the vast majority of the polluting. That should always be a warning sign, in my opinion.
I would like to add something. As one of the execs on both Family Farm Action and Family Farm Action Alliance with Angela, this is a top priority for us. There's not anything more important in the climate area than ensuring that the Biden administration and the new Congress not just think this is the solution, or that this is the answer in all that farm and farmers have to bring to the table. My biggest fear, our biggest fear, is the Climate Solutions Act, which has gotten some traction. It will probably be reintroduced, and I expect in the Senate Ag Committee will be smiled upon more than it needs to be, and that folks will pass that. And all the things Jake said and Emily said are correct. But the other factor that concerns me and concerns our team is that then they'll say, well, we did that. We did that. And they'll point to that bill. That bill, while the credits need to be in the mix and have a conversation and put the safeguards that were described here, it can't be a standalone bill that is announced as the solution. There's much more to bring to the table through regenerative agriculture, through building resilient local and regional food systems. And we need to all together collectively, every time we hear an elected official mention that bill, say, well, what else are you going to do? That is not enough. You're leaving the farmer out. You're leaving the local community out. And most of all, it will not fix the current situation we're in as it relates to the extreme weather that our farmers and our communities and all of us are facing in climate change. So it's a great question. It is something we are concerned about going into this new Congress and with the Biden administration, that one particular bill, that's all it does, will be used as everyone saying, well, we fixed that problem as it relates to agriculture. And that's just not so.
Definitely. Well, it looks like we are running up against time. Thank you all so much for your thoughtful questions, and thank you, team, for your answers. With just a few minutes left, I'm gonna pass it back to Jake for just another minute to talk a little bit more about our membership program and how you can continue to stay engaged.
Yeah, thanks, Anna, and thanks everyone who's joined. We are going to continue this dialogue. This is not the last time you're going to see us. Obviously, we're going to continue to work on these issues, but also we're going to start having, as we've mentioned, a monthly video conversation. I'll be engaged in that process. I know others on the team are going to be engaged in that process. And our big, one of our significant goals in this Congress is to keep you up to date on what's happening as members in Washington, D.C. and what we can actually make progress on, because we think that the time clearly is now. As Emily has said, our legislators have no excuse now not to take action on these issues, but we're going to need your help, and we're going to need your help as members. So if you can join on, if you can forward our membership invite to your neighbors and your friends and family, we'd appreciate that. We've tried to keep it cost effective, and we're going to continue to try to give you as much value out of that as we possibly can. So thanks again for everyone who's joined, and thanks, Anna, for doing a great job organizing us here today.
I want to thank everybody for joining. All of us as a team, one of the most important things about being a member, or if you choose not to be, is to stay in touch. The policies that are within this document are not just ours. It's a collective, a collaborative effort among many organizations. We need to hear from you. We need to hear from those that are the consumers, the eaters, and what your needs are and what you see is wrong. We need to hear from the small businesses, the local businesses, the regional businesses, and we need to hear from the farmers and ranchers. And together, we'll find the solutions, and together, we'll implement those solutions. So thank you all very much.
Definitely. Yes, thank you all for joining us today. And we hope that you're able to put this toolkit to use in your states and communities. A reminder again that members are going to be getting information sent about our next monthly Zoom call. So get those memberships in and keep an eye on your email. And just thank you again for spending your time with us and joining this collective effort. We hope that you have a great rest of your day.